If I knew what science fiction was, I wouldn't need to write it. It's finding a definition for a genre so diverse and so philosophically engaged and so largely satirical as science fiction is really hard. I like to think that I write science fiction because it's the closest thing to naturalism or realism that there is now. I don't think that the traditional novel is very well set up to talk about catastrophic change or the speed at which social mores change or the speed at which politics is developing. I think we always need new tools, and realism is always constantly being reinvented. We're constantly having to find new ways of telling the truth. And I think science fiction is one of those ways. And I suspect that it's getting to the point now where it's outlasted its usefulness, and we're having to look for other ways of telling the truth. We have tended, until fairly recently, to think about intelligence as a single plot on a graph, a single line on a graph, so things are more or less intelligent than we are. But the more we know about the way other animals think, the better our experiments get, and they're not easy to design, so it was always going to take a long time for us to get to this point. But the more we know, the more we realize there are many different kinds of intelligence suited to very particular environments. And now that we've started to develop computers that can do things that look intelligent to us, we realize that our intelligence is really very specific. It's very unusual. It's probably unique. And so I think intelligence has been a really useful word up to this point. And now we need an entirely new vocabulary and a much bigger vocabulary to explain what is going on, to explain why box jellyfish that have about 4 neurons engage in really complicated mating behavior, or to explain why a computer can find the information that I'm after before I can, even though it has no idea what it's talking about. In such a world, a single word, intelligence, is just not pulling its weight anymore. The development of social media, it's had an effect on me rather in the way that wars have an effect on writers. It makes it very difficult to write. It makes the social environment in which you're working so fluid and so overcharged and so frenetic and so slightly hysterical that it's very hard to shut that noise out and just tell the truth about your own experience. There's an awful lot of opinion making going on at the moment, and I used to be quite involved in that, and I write journalism as well as fiction, and so I'm involved in that as well. But I'm getting less and less interested in my beautiful opinions and more interested in the kind of silence that is required to tell the truth about your own mental state and emotional experience. I think that I don't think we're losing silence exactly, but I'm not sure we value silence enough at the moment. And I think there will come a corrective point in which we learn to turn all these wonderful toys off. They're wonderful toys. I don't mind toys. I like toys. I'm a boy. I like toys. But there comes a point when you learn to turn them off. And I think we're at that point. One of the shocking developments over the last couple of years is our machines and networks' ability to read and capitalize upon human emotion. We talk in terms of, wouldn't it be wonderful for a robot to read our emotions and be emotional? Well, they're already emotional. You only have to look at the behavior of YouTube. YouTube is a network run by an algorithm that wants to keep you rooted at watching videos. This is not an unreasonable thing for a video site to do, by the way. I don't have a problem with what it does in formal terms. But YouTube, the system, has discovered in the process of operating that the way to keep people watching the screen is to terrify them half to death. And so we have a network system that completely understands and knows how to capitalize upon terror. And this is where we're at now. And no one saw it coming. And you can make good arguments for why the economics of our current system is not ideal, but actually, to be fair, no one saw this one coming. The designers of YouTube really did not see this one coming. No one wanted this, and yet this is where we are. And this is correctable while we can see patterns of data. All this is correctable. All this is fixable. It might take a while, but it's fixable. I think the really big worry is quantum cryptography. Because with quantum cryptography, you can make your networks go dark. You can render every communication unbreakable by an outside party. So within 5 to 10 years, no one need know the sources of anything. So I think we're reaching a crunch point where we either become unconscious or inadvertent nodes in a network, and that's one solution, or we really have to turn everything off. And that's daunting, because we lose a lot of value by doing that. I've tried this. I've tried using artificial assistants. And for years, I've tried this. And it begins very simply with a style checker, something that will count the numbers of words in your sentence and looks at the lengths of the words that you are using. And I've used this to force myself into new ways of writing dialogue or writing new ways of doing a scene. Because if you're a musician, you're playing with other musicians and you learn from other musicians. If you're a writer, you have no one to play with. You're all on your own. So you use whatever devices are to hand to kick your brain into a new gear. And that can be everything from reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland to taking drugs, which I would not recommend because the results are pretty unreliable, to playing with tools and playing with toys. And so these toys have been around for a while, but there is now a fantastic toy out there, which is a generative adversarial network that will predict text not just on the word level, which is what you have on your phone, but on the paragraph level. It has read many books, or it has been fed many books, I should say, and it takes your line and it tries to work out what you will write next on the basis of everything, all the text that it's been fed. And the consequence of using this program is not to copy what the computer says, because it's never quite good enough. And even if it was good, it's not what you want to say. So you're always going to change and adapt and rewrite. But what this system does, it's constantly elbowing you and say, what if you followed that path? What if that character did that unexpected thing? What if there was this moment of quiet? What if he made a gesture? What if she stood up? And just that constant, sort of slightly idiotic input is lovely. I haven't found a way of making it work yet, but it's so exciting. And I think the really exciting thing about artificial intelligence, so-called, is that it stops us behaving in a mechanistic way. Because let's remember, the machines come from us. Mechanical behavior is something that we made. We're the ones who think mechanically. So if we're designing machines that stop us thinking in rote ways and boring ways and predictable ways, fantastic. That's wonderful. That's a really exciting development. Well, unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the author, but there is a wonderful book just been published recently called Artificial Unintelligence. Unintelligence. And I think that term will run and run. Artificial idiocy is the future, I think, because we don't know what intelligence is. We don't have good definitions for it. Trying to make artificial versions of it, unsurprisingly, throws up all kinds of errors, mistakes, unintended consequences. Artificial unintelligence is the way forward, I think. With Read Robots, I'm putting together 100 stories about robots throughout the history of the literature, which you can always argue these things, but for me goes back to a short story, a comic squib by Charles Dickens. And when I was offered the opportunity to do this anthology, I was thinking in terms of machines and about technology. And given my work and my background, I thought, well, this will be an enjoyable thing to do. It won't be particularly emotional. It won't be particularly to do with affect. It might be a bit techie. And I was completely wrong, because the literature of robots is actually the literature of conscious slave owners. What is it to have a slave? What is it to build a slave? What is it to run one? And once that gets in your head, you realize how much thought and humanity and emotion and care has gone into the literature of robots. So it's the usual case with science fiction. In the end, if it's any good, it's never about the machine. It's always about the human relation to what we make. Much is being written about people's ability to plagiarize or quote or mash up existing material using computers. Nothing feels particularly authentic at the moment. Everything is a mash-up of everything else. I think that's going to change, and the technology I'm looking forward to is already out there, and it's already being rolled out at certain universities, and it's the really good plagiarism checker. And if you write a lot, and if you write a long book of non-fiction, you'll realize how useful plagiarism checkers are, because you plagiarize without even realizing it, and you don't want to, and you are taking received opinions without really analyzing them. And it's really useful to have this angel on your shoulder saying, you haven't thought about this properly, you're still using this source or that source or the other source. And the more sophisticated the mechanics of those programs get, and the more material they are fed, the better and more nuanced and more helpful and more friendly those machines are going to get. Weirdly, for all that we talk about the fake news, which is a serious problem, I think that the exciting bit about AI is its ability to force us to tell the truth, to tap us on the shoulder and say, well, we don't know much, but we think you're being inauthentic. That is so exciting.